Hello everybody. So I've heard some claims that they want to ban men from childcare centres, and I've also heard questions. Some people have said, what kind of a man would ever want to be a childcare worker? And why would any man ever want to do it? So I'm going to answer that because I was a childcare worker a little bit when some of my first jobs, and I'll explain why that happened for me. Now I obviously can't talk to everybody that does it, but I'll just explain why I did that and why I ended up doing it and why I didn't do it for very long. So, first of all, I had an older sister, but then I also had 4 younger sisters. My parents split up when I was about 18 months old, and they both got remarried to other people. And when they got remarried, they decided to have extra kids. So these kids were, so the oldest of the 4 of them was 8 years younger than me, and I actually babysat her. So I was like 11 and she was 3, and I'd look after her. And when then the younger ones happened, so one, I was 14 when the next one was born, and then I was 18 for the next one, and I was 20 for the last one. So I was 8, 14, 18 and 20 years older than my 4 sisters. So varying ages, and I babysat all of them at different points. So early on in my life, and as I moved towards trying to get a job, that was something that I'd done. The only other thing I'd done that I could put on my resume, if you like, was I'd mowed some lawns, or emptied the dishwasher or fed the cat or stuff like that, that you're not going to get a job based on that. And of course everywhere wants you to have work experience. So then my mum, with little sisters number 2 and 3, so the ones that were 14 and 18 years younger than me, she started a party business, and it was mainly for children's parties, and most of the children were, I'd say, probably between 8 and 12. Now, of course, my little sisters were about that age, and I was quite a bit older than that. So I was like 22, 23, and so I dressed up as a pirate and did some juggling. I had some sticks and I knew how to juggle sticks. So they called me Captain Juggling Sticks. And we made wooden swords and got the kids to fight with them, although they can do Harry Dean with wooden swords. And we get the kids to dress up. So I'd mainly be for the boys at the party. So if it was a boys' party, I'd have a bigger role than if it was a girls' party. Because boys at different ages don't really relate to women in the same way as they do with men. So they wanted me there for the boys' parties. So, I would be there for the girls' parties too. So we'd have a girls' party and they'd all be fairies and princesses, and I wouldn't do very much. I wouldn't have a big role, because girls at certain ages wouldn't invite boys. So it'd be just all girls, and I'd just be there, hello, and I'd just juggle the sticks and be at a distance. And we had a horse and cart, and I'd lead that around, and so I'd lead them on the horse and cart, but I wouldn't have much to do with the girls because the girls didn't care about having a man involved. Some of them did, but most didn't. So I'd be a distance away from them. And so I did that, and then when I moved interstate to try to get a job, and I got a job out in a primary school, an Indigenous primary school, and I was basically teacher assistant. They called me a tutor, but it was essentially I was just being there in the back of the classroom and helping the kids to understand their work. And we used to have 2 in a class with the teacher, so we had a teacher and 2 assistants. I think sometimes we had 3. And look, a lot of the people that do that would be women. It was mostly women. I'd say it was about 4 women to every 1 man that would do that. But there were a few men that did it, and it was okay. There wasn't really much bonding with the girls or the boys with that because you were just doing your job. But I probably did get a better reaction from the boys. Some of the boys would be very naughty. They'd do the wrong thing. They'd try to hit people, all that sort of stuff. And they did find that having a man there, me, was better able to control them. So sometimes they just wouldn't do what the women wanted them to do. That wasn't always the case, but sometimes that was the case. So they did sometimes use me in a disciplinary fashion. I didn't hit them or anything, but it was more just saying, hey, get back in line, that sort of thing. And I worked with both boys and girls with that, but it was probably more boys. Because again, when you're in a position which is mainly women and you're a man, you have a specific gender role. So I don't know if this is the case for women that are working in male-dominated areas, such as being a plumber, but it certainly is the case with that sort of a role. And so when I transitioned from that and I came back to the city, to Alice Springs, and there was no job for me, I ended up, I put myself down to what they called relief childcare. So essentially there were 6 childcare centres. I'm not sure if that's the whole of Alice Springs or they were just the ones that were there when I was there. And I was there in case anybody called in sick. So it's a bit like temp work, but it was more specific because it was just for the childcare centres. And so if somebody called in sick, I would get a phone call when they call in sick. So most childcare centres that open at 8, but that actually most of the workers would start at 8:30. That's from memory, at least that's when it was. It might have been a bit different. But so I'd get a phone call at 8:30. Sometimes I'd get it at 9 because they'd forget. And then I'd have to suddenly jump to attention and go down there and start work at 9:30 or perhaps 10. And obviously you're missing an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours of your day. And I don't get paid for that. I only get paid from when I actually turn up. And so I have to rush, have to do that, and then I'm still missing an hour to 2 hours of work for the day. And it's minimum wage. This was not high paying. And then on top of that, they'd often cut an hour or 2 hours off the end of the day. So I might only do, let's say, 10 till 2. It's a 4-hour shift. It's not real good. That's the minimum amount that they're allowed to give you. So 4 hours at minimum wage. Of course, minimum wage then was different to what minimum wage is now, but it wasn't good money. And I wouldn't get that every day. In fact, on average, I'd get it about, say, 2 days a week when I was doing that. Now, I'm just going to say, you cannot pay rent in Alice Springs on 2 days a week of minimum wage work. You just can't. I mean, it kept me going until I could get a proper job, but it was not enough to live on. This wasn't a career. This was a stopgap measure, better than having none. And at that stage, I decided not to go on the dole. It's just a little personal thing. And I had some money saved up because I actually earned quite a lot from working in the remote school, mainly because I had no expenses. But yeah, it drained my savings having to do this work. So it wasn't pleasant financially. It was horrific. Financially, it's not what you want to do. So I did that because, of course, I had that history of babysitting kids or my own sisters, and also, like, it wasn't just them. I'd also babysit my cousins, my cousins, and then my cousins' kids, and a few friends that had kids. You know, it was always sort of a personal family connection. So when I did that, so the 6 places all gave me at least a day of work. Now 2 of them only gave me 1 day. That was it. They gave me 1 day and that was it for life. Now they didn't ban me or anything, but they never brought me back. And those 2, I'm not going to say names, and it might not even be open anymore, but they were horrifically sexist. They didn't like that I was a man. And it was just pretty horrible the whole day. For both times I did it. They didn't want me to be there. And, you know, it was just horrible. And I mean, who would want to put themselves through that? It was just a horrible experience. You know, I'm thinking, I'm doing this for you to help you out. You know, you've got someone called in sick. And they just treated me like dirt. And, you know, just awful. Now there was another one that also was pretty awful, but they gave me 3 days, but not in a row. And then there was another one that was so awful, but then they brought me back a month later or 2 months later and gave me a couple of weeks. I didn't know why they did that. And they acted like they hadn't treated me horribly the first time. And And then they ended up treating me horribly anyway when they didn't need me anymore. And then that was it. Now, then there were two that were actually treating me well. Now, one of them had a man working there who was a fairly typical manly blokey bloke, who had a fatherly figure. Now, he encouraged me to work in childcare, and I did a similar role to him. I was a fatherly figure, and that was actually an Aboriginal childcare centre. They were very happy to have me there, and I did quite a lot of work with them. Not all the time, but whenever they needed somebody, I was someone that they considered. I wasn't their top pick, but I was up there. And then the one that gave me the most work was one which the manager had the idea, and she said, we want to have 50-50 men and women. They didn't have any men working there. So they said they would give me 1 day a week, a permanent 1 day a week job for as long as I needed it. Or at least, sorry, it was at least for 6 months. So not permanent, but 6 months. 6 months of 1 day a week. And then extra days as required. So some weeks I'd do 2 days, some weeks I'd do 3. And I think I might have even done a full week. So I did that, and I managed that for as long as I could, because financially this was draining me. This was financially draining to do this. And the thing was, all of the childcare centres agreed they needed more men working there. And the reason that they needed more men was because children psychologically need to have both male and female role models. So if they don't have that, then they can grow up unbalanced. Now, different things can happen if they're unbalanced, but for example, you might hear about girls with daddy issues might end up becoming strippers, sex workers, that sort of thing. And boys that don't have a dad around will often become violent and abusive, and they might turn to a career of crime. And sometimes you'll get them both end up with each other and they'll become what I call bogans, or what we call bogans, which are people that are long-term unemployment. They might never have a job. They'll just do drugs and drink alcohol all day, have lots and lots of kids, and not really ever contribute really to society. And that's what you can get. Now, that's not just from having no men in the childcare. That's from being raised by a single mother with no male influences in their life, and then sending their kids to childcare with no men there. Now, that's why you need to have them. Now, if you're a couple, a married couple, male and female, let's just say, and you send your kids to childcare and there's only women there, it's not going to hurt the kids. I'm only talking about when you have a single mother that has no male influences in their life. So they don't have a brother, they don't have a dad, they don't have an uncle, they have no men at all. They send them to a childcare centre with just women. That's when problems can happen. It happens with both girls and boys that are sent there. So this is just a fact. And if you're... Now, okay, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to end up going off the rails, but it is much more likely, and it's a big problem. So why did I want to work there? I didn't. I was doing it because I couldn't get a job. Why would anyone want to do it as a career? Now, most people that do childcare as a career, well, there's a few different reasons to do it. One is because you have kids at the childcare centre and you get free. They often let you have your kids at the childcare centre for free if you work there. And if they don't let you do it for free, then they let you have a discount. And so some women will do that, maybe start off when they can't get a job, they're very young, and then they have a kid, the kid goes to the childcare centre, and then they just stay there because it's easier than getting another job. So that's one type of person that will do that for life. Another type will be the ones that end up being managers, and other ones will be the ones that work there with higher pay as, educators, as teachers. And I suppose then there's just some people that don't really have any ambition to do anything more. But what about boys? Why would a man want to do that as a career? Now, I noticed, I said there was that one man. There were also 2 other men that were there that were gay men. Now, when they were working there and I was being discriminated against, they were in some of the awful places, they were not being discriminated against. It was almost like them being gay essentially made them like women as far as all the discrimination was concerned. So they didn't face discrimination. So they were treated normally. And then they still discriminate against me for not being gay, for being a man that wasn't gay. And that's pretty awful. So, I mean, I don't have a very big sample size, but I have known people in other childcare centres around different places, and a large proportion of the men that work there are gay. Now, a person that we're talking about in the news is a gay man. Now, I'm not saying that makes him more likely to do these terrible things, but maybe that sort of encourages them to want to do that as a career. So, the thing is, what they should be doing, in my opinion, is raise it from a minimum wage job to something a little bit higher. So I think if you're going to get people that behave themselves, you need to pay them properly. And you're dealing with people looking after your kids, so pay them. Second thing is, I think that we need to have a public version, a free version of childcare. So, okay, you can still have people who want to pay through the nose for it, but have a free version. Have one where you can send kids, maybe even if it's only allowed to be 1 day a week, and send them without having to pay. Because this should be something that should be free. And as far as safety is concerned, they should just make extra sure that people are always looking at people at all times. Take away their phones, and do any other safety measures that are needed. Now, the one safety measure that's not needed is to ban men. That is not a safety measure, that's just a discrimination measure. And when you have discrimination in a workplace, it's not good. Now, I know a lot of women complain they're working in the mines, for example, and there's very few women working there, and they face a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of sexism, a lot of all that. It's awful working in a place where you face that. And this is why a lot of jobs, now there are some jobs that are 50-50 or close to it, but there's a lot of jobs which are male dominated and there's some that are female dominated. When you're in a female dominated job, such as a childcare worker, you feel a lot of discrimination. And a lot of it's quite open and blatant, and they'll say, oh, you're a man, you're going to be whatever. And the most discrimination I faced was from parents, from those single mothers, the ones that actually need to have a male role model working there. They would in some cases be man-hated, and they would treat you badly for working there, for being there, just for existing, just for breathing. So, yeah, I think that we do need to change things up a bit, and banning men is definitely not the right answer, I don't think. No, I'm not going to go into that sort of workplace again, I don't think, because, yeah, all right.